Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today we're going to be looking at the 2018 governor map based off polling numbers in every one of these states, of course between the Republicans and Democrats, sometimes with an independent, in the special cases of Kansas and Alaska. So we start off our map with 7 Republicans and 7 Democrats. Here's what the current map looks like for the governorships across the United States. 16 Democrats, 1 independent, and 33 Republicans. Key areas for Democrats to possibly make pickups in are Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, New Mexico, Nevada, states that went for Hillary Clinton back in 2016. And then we go ahead for areas where the GOP could possibly improve on: Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Colorado, a number of these states. But overall, there are a number of key Republicans and a number of Democratic states. And to be frank about it, they are safe already. They are either likely or safe. New polling numbers just came out today, actually, 2 that favor the Republicans, 1 in Maryland, 1 in Tennessee, both double-digit leads for the Republicans there against the Democratic opponent. However, we're going to go through this map, and we're going to start off with the safe states because I don't like talking about the toss-ups first. And some of these states, of course, do not have any opinion polling because why waste money on a state you already know is going to go a certain way? A case such as in Alaska, that's not Alaska, that is Alabama. We will come to Alaska eventually. Polling numbers actually very interesting there, considering that there is hypotheticals there, not just a three-way race, but Alabama, obviously safe for the GOP almost every election season. No reason why it shouldn't be as well. Idaho, there is a possibility of this race getting closer than previous elections, but I don't see a chance for the Democrats there. Over in Nebraska, another safe GOP state without polling. Along with South Dakota, you can pretty much expect these states. South Dakota was rated likely Republican for whatever reason, but I don't necessarily agree with that distinction of the state. I think South Dakota is a safe Republican state at this point in time. Here's a state with polling. Arkansas shows Asa Hutchinson ahead by 39%, so obviously a safe state. And here's another. The first Clinton state now going to the GOP. The state of Massachusetts, which shows Charlie Baker ahead by 35%. The Democrat only has 21% of the vote, according to opinion polling. Over in Wyoming and South Carolina, 2 states with no real opinion polling out just yet, so those states are still although South Carolina could go into the likely column, right now I have to put it in the safe GOP column just based off previous characterizations of the state. And Vermont does not have any opinion polling. However, that is expected to be either likely or safe for the GOP. But New Hampshire does have opinion polling, which shows the GOP ahead by 25%. Keep in mind, those 3 states up there were all won by Hillary Clinton in 2016. Obviously, New Hampshire was the closest of them all, but it seems like New Hampshire will be the closest of them all in this general election, surprisingly. So, but just not good for the Democrats, considering that the Republicans are probably going to win by larger margins. In the states that are safe for the Democrats, which means more than 15%, Pennsylvania is the first to go. So that is a state Donald Trump carried back in 2016 by 44,000 votes. Now safe for the Democrats, a 16-point lead for them. Over in California, as expected, 23.4% lead for the Democrat Gavin Newsom there. Over in New York, Andrew Cuomo leads by 22.5%, and in Hawaii, where the Democratic primary, as headlined on 270 to win, is the hardest part for winning a political office there. There is a very interesting Twitter thread that shows all of the candidates, pretty much it's just name recognition, out of the state of Hawaii, where the same 7 people have ran since the year 2000 and have been getting into elections, whether it be the representative or senator or governorship. It really doesn't matter. It's just the same names. It's pretty interesting. If you can find it, I don't know where it is now, but it's very interesting to see how Hawaii is pretty much very different from what you might see in some other states. But those are all of our safe Democratic seats and safe Republican seats. Pretty interesting seeing Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts red, while Pennsylvania is blue. But anything can happen in the governor elections. We can go over to the likely Republican states now, which means between 6 to 14, to 6 to 15%, my bad. Maryland goes under there with a 14.5% lead. The new poll came out today, I believe, showing Larry Hogan ahead by 15 or 13%, one of those numbers, but still a double-digit lead for my governor, which is very interesting considering that Ben Jealous was expected to gain in numbers, but it didn't happen. Over in Texas, 12.6%, also expected considering the GOP does very well there, but not enough to put it in the safe column. And for my home state of Maryland, the reason why I don't necessarily think that Ben Jealous is going to win the governorship, I live in a very, very Democratic neighborhood. I've yet to see a single Ben Jealous sign. I saw Baker signs, and yes, I am from the only county that went for Return Baker, but it wasn't by that big of a margin. In a Democratic area, I really should be expecting to see signs like that, and I've seen a couple Hogan signs, but I have yet to see those signs. And that may be, my own personal experience. I don't live everywhere in Maryland. I'm not in everyone's household, so I understand that. But from what I've seen personally, these poll numbers definitely correlate with what I'm seeing out on the political stage, because I've seen Ben Cardin signs, which he's safe for re-election, right? So when it comes down to it, it's very interesting to see a state as blue as my own have red shifts in only a couple of these races. In Alaska, though, this is a 8% lead for the Republicans. So when I said I would come to Alaska with a very interesting polling, the current governor is probably one of the most disapproved governors nationwide, with a couple of exceptions. Right now in Alaska, it would be expected that a very unpopular governor would lose re-election, right? However, Alaska, in one-on-one polling between the likely Republican nominee and current incumbent, and there's another Democratic candidate, I'll get to him in just a moment, the current incumbent independent governor leads him by 10% in the only poll that was taken nonpartisan to either political party. So one was taken by the Democrats, two were taken by the Republicans, and then there was one independent research poll that showed Bill Walker leading by 11% statewide. Well, there were a couple of other polls that were taken between the Democratic candidate and the Republican, and the Democratic candidate led by double digits as well. And some of the polls were not necessarily the same. There are very few polls taken, but it's pretty interesting to see how when there's a one-on-one race, it seems possible for the incumbent governor who may be disapproved of to beat a Republican, or a Democrat to beat a Republican. But since both candidates are going against each other, the vote is being split very badly. It doesn't favor the Democrats, doesn't favor the independents. It only favors the GOP. And I think that, what we saw in Kansas in the Senate election back in 2014 told the Democrats that they do need to run a candidate, even though that may not be the case because circumstances were different. Right now, Alaska is in the likely column for the GOP, but there are a lot of likely Democratic states. The first state we're starting off with is a flip. New Mexico flips from the GOP and goes in the likely column. If we look at the current map compared to this map now, there's a difference in that state, but right now, New Mexico leading by 13%. The Democratic nominee over in Connecticut, a 10% lead. There were no fully certified polls on Real Clear Politics, so I had to go find some other polls, but still pretty interesting to see a 10% lead for a Democratic nominee over a Republican. Over in Colorado, a 6% lead for Jared Polis over his opponent. Over in Illinois, a 9% lead, which is another flip from the GOP, so Illinois goes from red to blue. We look at Michigan. This is another flip as well, a 6.5% lead for Whitmer over Schuette, so very interesting. Minnesota, 9.5% lead for the Democrats. Keep in mind, a number of these races sometimes have Republican incumbents, or they're getting very close because of how the state has voted in the presidential election and previous elections, especially statewide elections. Oregon narrowly goes in the likely column with a 5.3% lead for the incumbent Governor Kate Brown. So that's pretty interesting, considering that race really shouldn't be close in a midterm election year that favors the Democrats. And in Wisconsin, a 5.4% lead for Tony Evers against Scott Walker, who is going for a third term. So red here, blue here. Very interesting to see polling numbers that favor the Democrats in a state like Wisconsin. However, poll numbers did favor Hillary Clinton back in 2016, so watch out for that as well. But that does not necessarily mean that poll numbers are wrong. That's for a whole nother video. 19 Democrats, 20 Republicans. Now let's go into the leaning Republican states. There are no tilt Republican states, so these will be the last characterizations for the GOP. Actually, we have another state to put in the likely column, and that is the state of Tennessee. Right now, the only poll taken actually came out today, which is very interesting. But right now, leads by 11% statewide. Over in Iowa, this is the last call to be made for the GOP. Iowa goes for the Republicans by 5%, which pretty much finishes it off in the leaning column, which means it could necessarily go towards the likely column if it was just 0.1% more. But Iowa, a 5% lead for Kim Reynolds against her Democratic opponent. So there are going to be some states that are going to end up in a tie, and we will come back to those. But now let's start with the leaning Democratic seats. Well, Rhode Island, leaning Democratic, a 2% lead in both polls taken. Interesting numbers. Over in, let's look for another state. The state of Ohio, a 1.6% lead in the state of Ohio for the Democrats. And there is another state, but I do want to come back to it. That is the state of Nevada. Actually, sorry, we'll come back to it because, again, I don't want to cover it too much. Also, Florida is another leaning Democratic state, but I want to come back to that one as well because I want to go into the tilt states and just talk about that for a little bit because it's going to be pretty surprising. So, actually, Arizona shows this is a tilt because it is a 1% lead. This is a tilt for David Garcia in Arizona, which the only poll taken shows Garcia leading the incumbent governor. And a lot of people think that there is a possibility for Farley to become the nominee Right now, the only polls taken show Garcia leading by a considerable amount. Over in Kansas, this is a 1% lead. And here's what's interesting. What is interesting? Greg Orman is taking 12% of the vote here, whether it's from the Republicans or the Democrats. There is a 1% lead against Laura Kelly over Chris Kobach, who is currently leading in the vote count, which means that he could become the nominee. However, there's a lot to go through. So, again, it is possible for either person, but right now it looks like Kobach will be the nominee. Kansas apparently will go blue if he's the nominee in a three-way race, with Greg Orban getting 12%, I believe, Kelly at 40%, and then the Republicans at 39%. So a very narrow 1% lead for the Democrats, which was pretty shocking to me. Over in Nevada, this is the state that I said we'd come back to. Nevada shows a 1% lead for Sisolak over Laxalt, and that's pretty interesting to me because Nevada is a Democratic state from 2016, yet somehow Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania have much better characterizations for the Democrats. It may just be the state itself being more of a swing state, but it's very surprising to see a Trump state be more Democratic than a Clinton state. But, Kansas and Nevada are around the same numbers here, apparently. So we've covered Ohio, which is a 1.6% lead. Oklahoma, though, this is interesting. This was actually the one with the 40 to 39, so it wasn't 40 to 39 for Kansas. However, right now, the current, state who is leading by 10% in the most recent poll taken goes up against, I believe, Drew Edmondson, if I'm not mistaken. But the Democrats lead by 1% statewide. If those were the two nominees, and they went up against each other. So that's interesting to see Oklahoma become a Democratic state. You would never expect that, especially since Trump won every county here. It was the largest margin of victory for John McCain in 2008. This is as Republican of a state as you can get, besides Wyoming, which is safe blue, by the way. But Oklahoma right now is tilting in the Democratic column somehow. Obviously, new opinion polling numbers will come out soon. That could likely change the way that this race is viewed. But for now, it is actually a tilt Democratic state. And that pretty much finishes off our numbers. So here's what's interesting. Florida is actually a 3.5% lead for the Democrats, which was pretty surprising to me considering Florida has a popular incumbent Republican governor, but it also isn't too expected. Usually there is party turnover, especially in swing states like Florida, so I can't really say I expected less, just probably more different of an outcome. I didn't expect such a large lead when the incumbent popular governor is not doing too well in terms of the Senate polls compared to what the Democrats are doing in the governor's race, and that finishes us off with two toss-up states, and those are the states that are currently tied in opinion polls, the states of Maine and Georgia. So those states I will not be making a characterization, mainly because I have used the tilted column, and I don't want to have to tilt these states into either political party because it is a very great possibility that the Republicans win in Maine and the Democrats win in Maine and the Democrats win in Georgia and the Republicans win in Georgia. So overall, here's the map before, here's the map after, a lot more blue. Interesting. With Kansas, Oklahoma, Florida, these states are somehow blue after being red for so long. And again, this is not my prediction. This is all coming down to opinion polling. You can go check it yourself. But overall, this was a very interesting video to do. So thank you guys for watching this video. Comment down suggestions below, and I'll see you all tomorrow.